Neighbors heard a piano at 3 amperes. The house was empty. Neighbors heard it first at 3 in the morning. A piano coming through the thin savanna fog, like a voice behind gauze. Bright, deliberate, not a practice scale, but a song shaped by hands that knew what they were asking the instrument to feel. Windows glowed weakly along Jones Street. Porch fans turned lazily, pushing warm air that smelled like iron and rain. The music came from number 119, the Carpenter House, which stood empty, locked, listed, and waiting. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The year was 2019, late August, heat pressing the city flat. The Carpenter House had been vacant since early summer, after an estate sale peeled it of rugs and lamps and the porcelain spaniel that used to guard the hearth. The last owner, a retired piano teacher named Odile Carpenter, had passed in late spring. Her nieces lived up in North Carolina, good people by all accounts, but too far away to keep fresh flowers on the mantel. Realtors came and went with their careful smiles. Contractors measured crown molding and murmured about old wiring. But at 3 in the morning, the house was nobody's, and then very suddenly, everyone's. Caius Mercer lived across the street in an apartment above a bookstore that smelled like paper and cedar oil. He was 37, a sign painter by trade, a listener by habit. At 3:02, he stepped onto his balcony with a glass of water and a small, unreasonable hope that the sound would be a radio left on in a passing car. It wasn't. It had the weight of wood and felt and string. It had the soft, percussive bloom that only happens when hammers strike and then get out of the way. He thought of the names of pieces like someone reciting Saints, Nocturne, Arabesque, Consolation, and then recognized the one it was. Claire de Lune played a hair slower than most, with crescendos that rose like someone standing up carefully from an old chair. He could hear the rubato in the right hand, the left hand anchoring, a conversation between patience and longing. The melody reached for the air over Forsyth Park and came back with a question. Caius put on shoes. On the sidewalk, humidity wrapped him in a damp shawl. Moths battered the street lamp. Down the block, a delivery truck sighed at a stop sign. The music continued. Not perfect, not sloppy. Human. Nora Bly stepped from the shadows of her courtyard with a leash looped around her wrist, her old hound Amos peering from behind her knees. Nora was 68, the kind of neighbor who knows who is supposed to be where and when. She tilted her head. Your radio. Her voice made it a question. Or is that in the house? It's in the house, Caius said, and the words made the night hold itself differently. They were not the only ones. Mr. Patel from the corner bodega came up the steps wiping flour from his hands because insomnia likes small projects, and he had been making dough for morning pastries. On the second floor of a yellow clapboard place, a girl in a college sweatshirt cracked her window and frowned. An Uber drifted past and slowed. Even the driver leaned, listening. At 3:08, Nora called it in. She had a way with dispatchers, polite, precise, impossible to ignore. House is listed vacant, number 119 Jones. We have audible music consistent with a live piano. We are gathering out front. Please send a unit to clear the property. She gave her name, spelled it, gave her number, spelled it, and ended the call with thank you in a tone that made the words into a promise. 2 patrol cars rolled up at 3:17. Blue lights turned low so they watched the houses in a suggestion instead of a demand. Officer Malik Rhodes took the steps 2 at a time, his hair braided neatly, a scar like a grace note at the corner of his mouth. Behind him came Officer Lori Fenwick, steady and compact, the kind of person who never lost track of where the nearest door was. They paused at the front door. The music did not pause. In the short stillness between measures, you could hear the damp city breathing. Let me try the realtor box first, Fenwick said. Odile's nieces had left a lockbox hooked to the iron rail. Fenwick called the on-call number posted on the yard sign, woke a man named Barrett, whose voice came up out of sleep like a diver out of deep water, and got the code. She opened the box, palmed the key, glanced at Rhodes. He nodded. She unlocked the door. Inside, the air moved in waves. The foyer smelled like lemon oil and old paper. A staircase curved up like a question mark. To the left, the front parlor opened wide, and there, by the tall window, sat the piano that had not found a buyer. A nabe grand, walnut, its lid propped, its harp gleaming like a good secret. The bench was pulled out, the fallboard was up. No one sat there. But the song did not stop. Rhodes stepped closer, palms open, as if approaching an animal. Fenwick circled wide, eyes on corners and thresholds. Rhodes leaned and looked under the body of the piano the way a child looks under a bed. Empty. No pedals depressed. No one hiding. The music flowed with the serene confidence of someone who had forgotten to be afraid. The keys moved. Not all of them, just the ones the melody asked for, but they moved as surely as if struck by fingers. Rhodes watched a middle C rise and fall. He put his hand near the key, not touching, feeling only the movement of warm air. He swallowed. His throat made a sound like a small door closing. "Player mechanism," Mr. Patel whispered from the doorway, half hopeful. "Some have rolls hidden in the belly." Rhodes eased the bench back with his shin and lifted the front panel below the keys. Inside, felted hammers, whips, jacks, springs, everything that makes a grand, no motor, no roll. No belts, just the old generous mechanics of wood and intention. He let the panel fall softly back into place. The music reached the place where the melody thins into light. Fenwick walked the ground floor with calm hands and an efficient gaze. Dining room empty, kitchen empty, pantry empty, back door closed, latched, chain intact, powder room lonely and clean. Upstairs, a short hall with 2 bedrooms and a study. She went up. Caius waited in the foyer, pulse in his wrists. The house sighed the way old houses do when strangers put weight on old boards. A ceiling ticked. Somewhere a pipe tapped. The piano did not care. It turned a corner into the passage that always lands too beautifully, and Caius felt something behind his ribs try to stand up. Fenwick returned. "No one," she said. Windows latched, closets filled with air and dust. She cut a look at the instrument. The song decelerated like a train entering a station and came to its hush of an ending. The final chord hung and softened and then quiet. They all stood there for the kind of moment that takes its shoes off before it enters a room. Savannah shifted outside. Moths performed their soft violence at the glass. Across the street, a cat made a decision and took it back. Rhodes ran his hand along the piano's cheek as if it were a horse. He said, "I'm going to log this as an unsecured property check, no suspect found, no damage, no sign of forced entry. We'll notify the realtor to have a locksmith rekey and to secure the back windows." He looked at Nora. "We can sit on the block a while. If it plays again, call." Nora nodded. She had that way of nodding that promises she will do more than that. At 4, the block slept with one eye open. At 5, milk trucks wrote their notes on the morning. By 7, Rhodes had told the story to a sergeant who smiled with one corner of his mouth and said, "The city has old bones. Let it have old songs." By 11, Barrett had a locksmith on a ladder checking sashes and pins. At noon, a pair of teenagers in black shirts, tagged with the name of a moving company, carried a rolled rug out to a van and joked too loudly about ghosts the way kids do when they hope fear will think they're busy and pass them by. That night, at 3:01, the music began again. Not Debussy. The opening was older, the cadence stiffer, a Bach sarabande measured like footsteps on a tile floor. Slow, precise, inevitable. Neighbors emerged as if called by the same small bell. Caius took the steps 2 at a time. Nora did not bother with shoes. Officer Rhodes arrived inside 3 minutes, not even pretending he had not parked around the corner to make it easier to be the kind of cop he wanted to be. They found the same room, the same instrument, the same absence of anyone at all. The keys rose and fell, a metronome's mind and a prayer's heart. Rhodes stood at the tail, hand on the rim, feeling the sympathetic thrum in his palm. He mouthed to Fenwick, "You feel that?" and she nodded, jaw tight. When the sarabande ended, there was a brief, polite silence, as if the empty room expected applause. The house had a history, of course. In Savannah, houses accumulate story the way live oaks gather Spanish moss, one breath, and you are clothed in what came before you. Odile Carpenter had bought the name in 1974 with her first real paycheck from the conservatory where she taught. She had trained generations of children to curve their fingers like gentle pals, to count out loud, to breathe through nerves. She had hosted small recitals in the front parlor, little boys in stiff collars, little girls with bows that smiled even when they didn't. Caius knew this because in the weeks after the second night, he took to visiting old Mrs. Beaumont on the next block, who had been Odile's friend since summer dresses cost less than a bus ticket. He brought her ginger tea, she brought him names. Odile did not marry, Mrs. Beaumont said, with the complicated pride some women use to say a woman chose herself. Odile did not need to. She kept afternoons for students and evenings for pieces she wanted to meet again. If you heard music after midnight, it was because her mind had decided to go walking and her hands did not want her to go alone. Caius asked about family, about nieces, about anyone who might have keys. Mrs. Beaumont leaned back. The nieces did right by her. But Odile's real legacy is in the wrists of children, who can now make a room ask for mercy. She smiled. If the house is playing at 3, maybe it's just remembering how to talk. The third night brought rain hard enough to erase chalk from sidewalks. The piano began at 3:04 with something American copland, maybe open and upright as a prairie. The left-hand octaves came like fence posts along a road. Rhodes stood in the hall, dripping on the polished heart pine, and felt the hair along his arms think the thought it thinks before it stands. The sound was too clear, too present, to be a speaker hidden somewhere. He pressed his ear against the underside of the keyboard, reckless and gentle all at once, and listened there. He heard woodworking, felt creak and give. He pulled back and swallowed rain. Fenwick called the lab, not because lab techs solve hauntings, but because she trusted men and women who make their living saying, this is a fact and this is not. The lab sent a sound engineer on the 4th night. He arrived with a small case and an undramatic face, set up microphones, and mapped the way the sound bloomed in the room. He traced it like a weather system. He shook his head, not unhappily. It's a piano, all right. It's hammers striking strings. The waveforms don't lie. He gestured at the action, the fallboard, the keys. If it isn't a person, it's a mechanism I have never met. You'd think it was a player, Mr. Patel offered again, stubborn as a superstition that used to keep you safe. But where's the roll? Nora crouched and put her palm flat on the bare floor in front of the lyre, breath held like a child listening to a secret inside a seashell. She looked up. Feel that. They all did. Not a vibration exactly, more like a miniature version of thunder when it is far and polite. As if the house were a body with a heart beating very, very softly. Caius began to arrive early, at 2:45, with a folding chair and a thermos. He took notes in a small pad he used when hand-lettering menus for restaurants. Tempo, piece, weather, number of listeners. He discovered that the set lists, if that is what they were, made a kind of sense. Debussy the first night, liquid and moonbitten. Bach the second, exacting and austere. American the third, shoulders back. On the 5th night came Chopin, a nocturne in E minor that stepped like someone finding their way through their own house in the dark without turning on the light. On the 6th, Satie, that famous gymnopédie that sounds like someone remembering a conversation and only later realizing what they should have said. On the 7th night, the piano did not play. At 3 o'clock, the block held its breath, and then, shy or wise, let it go. Caius packed his chair, embarrassed at his own hope. Nora turned on her porch light and then, half smiling, turned it back off. The realtor, nervous about liability, scheduled a full inspection the next day. A structural guy with hands like shovels walked the joists and hummed. A piano tech from Tybee Island arrived with a satchel and a reverence. He took the action apart and laid its bones gently on a quilt. He showed them the jacks, the whippins, the flanges. He pressed dampers against strings, counted, and pronounced the instrument healthy for its age and history. He found only one oddity, and it was not mechanical. Tucked inside the case, caught between the soundboard and a brace, was a small envelope the color of tea. It had been there a long time. On the front, in Odile's hand. For the person who hears it, the room forgot how to breathe for a second. The piano tech handed the envelope to Barrett, who handed it to Nora, who looked at Caius and then at Officer Rhodes and said, "You better." Caius opened it. Inside, one page in a tight, old-fashioned script, "If you are reading this, you are listening," Odile had written. "If you are listening, you may hear what most houses forget to say out loud. I have taught many to count, I have taught some to sing. I have failed some and forgiven myself slowly. I left the piano because I could not bear the idea of it being lonely if I took it somewhere that did not know this air. If it plays when I am gone, let it. If it stops, let it rest. I have, in the middle of the night, heard keys move under my hands without me having asked them to. I have believed this was grief, and then believed it was kindness, and then believed it was just the way wood remembers being a tree. If you must name it, call it practice." The letter ended with a short list of pieces she loved at 3 in the morning and a small instruction in parentheses that was not, in fact, written with those marks, but with Odile's own delicate dashes. "Leave the north window a finger's width open when it is not raining. The instrument likes to hear the live oaks whisper." That night, clouds flew low, two hurried to stay. At 2:59, Caius propped the north window, only a sliver, just enough for the air to acknowledge the room. At 3, nothing. At 3:01, the first notes of the Goldberg variations rose and unbuttoned the dark. Savannah kept her manners. Crowds did not gather. People did not shout or film with the kind of greed that makes things smaller. They sat on stoops with mugs. They stood in hallways with their hands around their own wrists, the way people stand with themselves at wakes. The police came when called, then stayed uncalled. Barrett, the realtor, began to arrive too, not because it helped sell the house, but because he had not known a job could include being present for something that did not ask for money. On the 10th night, a woman in a green raincoat stopped on the front steps and did not come inside. She was in her 40s, hair cut short for hot weather, hands with a musician's map of callous and grace. When the piece ended, a Schubert impromptu that made the room softly astonished, she said, quietly, "Odile?" Mrs. Beaumont, hearing it, came in on Caius's arm and said the name, the way a friend says it when the friend is late on purpose. "Juniper Miles," she said, "piano class of 1997, the only student Odile ever called ferocious." Juniper smiled and made a face that admitted both pride and apology. "I left for Chicago and then for everywhere else. I did not come back when I should have. I am here now." She looked at the neighbor. "May I?" The house gathered itself. Juniper sat on the bench, didn't touch for a count of 5, then set her fingers where they had learned once to listen. She played something that did not need a name, the way warm water does not need a name when you have been cold too long. In the middle of the phrase, a note moved that she had not struck. It came into the chord like a clever friend inserting a joke. Juniper laughed under her breath, cheeks wet, and shifted. The instrument and the woman spoke for a while like people who had promised not to argue and then argued anyway and then remembered why they loved each other. It went on for 3 weeks. Not every night, not on demand. Sometimes the house slept. Sometimes the city rained too hard for even ghosts to be heard. Sometimes a siren ran its thin salt line down the block and the piano waited until the sound had passed. Once, in the middle of a storm that made the gutters spit, it played a lullaby Odile had composed for a boy named Manu in 1986 when his mother was sick and he kept falling asleep on the bench. Mrs. Beaumont recognized it and cried without bothering to hide it. The story found its small, polite way into the paper, 2 paragraphs on page 3, written by a local reporter who understood that fact and wonder are not enemies. The headline used the word mystery because that is the word that lets everyone keep their peace. No one mocked, no one tried to monetize. In a city that sells its own past by the scoop, that was a kind of miracle. On the last night, October arrived dressed as September's tired sister. The air cooled, the live oaks shook their sleeves. Caius woke at 2:40, not startled, just called. He walked across the street, unlocked the door with the realtor's blessing, and sat in the dark. He did not bring a thermos. He did not bring his pad. At 3, the piano did not start. At 3:03, either a 3:05. At 3:07, a tiny sound, not a key, not a pedal, cloth on wood. Juniper stepped into the parlor and took her place. She played the Lighthouse song from someone else's life, then Odil's favorite warm-up, then something Caius could not place that sounded like forgiveness given gently and not all at once. In the second page, a breeze from the north window touched the back of his neck, a key depressed that her fingers had not chosen. Juniper did not correct it. She smiled and let the note belong. When it ended, the city had the particular quiet of a decision. Juniper stood, laid her hand on the fallboard, and moved it down slowly until the keys were covered. She did not latch it. She turned to Caius and Nora and Rhodes and Mrs. Beaumont and Barrett and Mr. Patel and the handful of others who had become the kind of congregation that forms without a bulletin. She said, "There," and it sounded like a benediction. The piano did not play at 3 after that. Not the next night, not the next week, not in November when the air remembered how to be crisp, not in December when wreaths hung and college students went home and someone left a red scarf on the iron gate and no one took it because it looked like it belonged to the fence. The house stayed empty and not empty, listed and not for long, a property and a promise. In late January, a family bought it, a dental hygienist named Leora with a laugh that took the corners off bad news. Her husband, Arlo, who repaired old radios and believed sound should be coaxed and not forced. Their daughter, Elowen 6, who walked into the front parlor, saw the nabe, put both hands flat on its cheek, and said, "Hello," as if greeting a very old dog. Juniper came on a Saturday with a claw-footed lamp Odile had loved and set it by the window without being asked. Sometimes, walking home from the shop, Caius would slow by the gate. He would hear scales around dinner time, small fingers finding middle C, laughter at wrong notes, the stern patience of a mother counting. Once, later than practice, earlier than worry, he heard a phrase of Debussy float through the sliver of the north window and thought, not possessively, but with gratitude, you kept one thing the way it liked to be. Every now and then, at 3 in the morning, he would wake, because the body remembers the hour it learned to lean forward. He would listen. The city would give him what the city gives. A siren's shrug, a train's whisper, the far scrape of a palm frond on a gutter. He would not hear the piano. He would hear instead that quieter, deeper thing, a house that had been asked to keep a story and had kept it as long as it needed keeping, and then, with good manners and a bow, set it down. If you ever pass Jones Street near 3, look up. Someone might be washing a glass, someone might be turning a page. Someone might be dreaming a tune with their hands open on the covers. And in number 119, a girl might be asleep on the sofa with sheet music like a blanket, the north window left a finger's width open, the live oaks telling secrets in a language no one invented and everyone somehow understands. You could say nothing happened here. A vacant house made noise until it didn't. Keys moved and then they were still. Or you could say a small piece of the world did its best impression of grace and a few ordinary people showed up in time to hear it. Both things can be true. Both are enough. Wherever you are, whatever hour your own house favors, if you hear a song that has no source, let it finish, then wait one breath longer than you think you need. Sometimes, in that extra beat, you will feel the floor answer the air the way a body answers its name. And if you cannot name it, if the sensible part of you demands a mechanism, call it practice. Then stand in the doorway and be the kind of neighbor who listens. The dorm room that kept getting warmer every night. The first night she noticed it, the heat felt like a mistake rather than a message. Early September in Ohio, a Sunday that leaned into Monday, the kind of campus night when cicadas buzz like old streetlights and the dorm's brick walls hold the afternoon sun just long enough to be nostalgic. Isolde Marin unrolled a thrifted rug that smelled faintly of cedar, set 2 plants on the windowsill like green punctuation, and lay back on the narrow bed under the hum of a fan that tried hard and failed. Sutter Hall, room 412, 4th floor, end of the hall. The radiator beneath the window ticked its polite little ticks. Her phone read 78 inside, while the weather app swore 68 outside. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2018. Move-in had been a week of book stacks, cardboard cuts, and names learned in bursts that evaporated by dinner. Isolde's major was urban studies with a minor in printmaking because maps and ink made sense even when people did not. Her roommate, a sophomore transfer named Mairead Klein, arrived with a battered cello case and the posture of someone who had done 3 summers of lifeguarding and was still listening for whistles. Their RA, Bram Delaney, wore a lanyard like a badge and kindness like a habit. The floor smelled like laundry pods and slice and bake cookies. The building smelled like every Midwestern dorm built in the 1970s, a blend of cinder block, old varnish, and the ghost of burnt popcorn. That first night, Isolde pushed the window up 2 inches. The sash stuck, then relented with a groan that sounded like the word careful. She fell asleep to a parking lot lullaby and woke at 2:19 with her neck damp. The fan had not changed. The room had. The little thermometer clipped to her backpack strap said 81. She turned the fan higher. The blades shouted their small capacity. She kicked the blanket down and slept again like a person auditioning for rest. Monday, the heat drifted earlier, 10:47. A wave across her ankles first, then knees, then a slow embrace that felt like a crowded bus in July. She checked the radiator. Cold metal. She put her palm on the cinder block, on the window glass, on the closet door. Nothing from those shapes admitted guilt. Mairead returned from orchestra and set the cello gently on the desk chair. She stood still, chin tilted, the way musicians listen to rooms. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "It keeps getting warmer after midnight," Isolde said. "The building probably overcorrects, day cools down, system lags, night gets weird." Mairead nodded. "I fell asleep during rehearsal last winter in a practice room. Woke drenched. Found out the steam had backfed into a silent radiator. You could hear it in the walls if you pressed your ear." They both pressed their ears to the dorm wall. The cinder block offered a polite shush, the way libraries used to. No steam, no hiss, just the slow drum of a building's heart. By Wednesday, the room was a decision the night kept making. 83 by 1 a.m., 85 by 3. Isolde checked the hallway, cool enough to be a relief. She checked the stairwell, cooler still. In the common room, a girl wearing a sweatshirt that said "Ecology means everything" had her feet tucked under her and a textbook open like a tent. She looked up. "Your floor hot too." "Only ours," Isolde said. "Or only me. Or only when I try to sleep." They laughed because college teaches you to treat weirdness like weather. You comment, you adapt, you set one more fan on the windowsill and call it a life. Thursday brought a storm that argued with the city for hours, a late summer brawl of heat and lightning. The power hiccuped and then recovered. The building hummed. At 2 a.m., the room hung heavy. Isolde slid out of bed, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead to the screen, as if the night owed her an apology. Far below, a maintenance cart whispered along the service road. She saw the driver's hat and his careful hands. She did not see the face. She told herself the heat felt personal only because you cannot argue with a building and win. By Saturday, the temperature games had found a schedule. 9:58, a nudge. 11:30, a hand on the small of the back. 1:12, the sensation of standing too close to an open oven. Isolde began to time her showers like a boxer timing breath. She tried sleeping on the cool tile of the little bathroom. She tried damp cloths on wrists and ankles. She tried a sliver of ice in a hand towel held to her throat. She tried pretending it was fine. She told no one at home because her mother would only worry and send articles about heat stroke, and her father would suggest a hardware store trip that distance made irrelevant. Sunday night, Mairead woke first. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, said a word that sounded like, "What is this?" and went to the window. The sash had dropped the last inch by itself at some point in the night, closing with that old house suction that makes a soft kiss. She lifted it again, hot air breathed in, not outdoor hot. Not the honest humidity of a Midwest night, different, like the air that escapes when you open a dryer in a laundromat and forget to step back. "We call maintenance in the morning," Mairead said. "We tell them we have an invisible sauna. We use likable voices and the phrase safety concern." Monday morning, Bram came with a clipboard and his likable voice. He listened earnestly, took the temperature with a cheap tool that blinked numbers nobody trusted, wrote down 86, and then underlined it as if underlining were a wrench. He called facilities. They promised someone by afternoon. The someone arrived at 4:19, late enough to be human, early enough to look like hope. His name patch read Gentry. He was the kind of person who stands in a room like it has a puzzle only he can solve and then smiles when the puzzle turns out to be harder. He checked the radiator, the thermostat no one had noticed in the corner with its tiny slider, the vent slits high near the ceiling that made the room look like it could breathe if it wanted to. Steam off, he said. Air handler off. You got a ghost heater. He grinned to make sure they understood he meant the phrase and not the ghost. But he knocked on the radiator anyway, knuckles to iron, the way some people knock on wood when they do not believe in luck and practice it just in case. He opened the closet and frowned. Do you mind? He asked, and shifted their shoes to one side. Behind the shoe rack, a square of plywood patched a hole in the wall. Screws, paint over paint. He crouched, fit a screwdriver into a head, and worked it loose. When the panel came away, a breath of air came with it. Warm, the kind of warm air that has been waiting its turn. Old Chase, he said. Big one. They used to run steam risers along these shafts in the 70s. Maybe a repair, maybe somebody capped something and forgot to ask the night to forgive them. He put his hand into the dark space and paused. He was not afraid. He was listening. Hear that. They leaned closer. At first, only quiet, then a small sound. Not a hiss, not a vapor whisper. A tick. Regular, patient. Like a metronome a long room away. Gentry nodded. Thermal something. Or a tenant below you added a pet space heater that thinks it owns the building. I'll trace the chase. I'll talk to the engineers. He put the panel back gently and made a note on his worksheet with a pencil that had been sharpened to the earnest point of a person who still respects graphite. I will try to fix the physics. In the meantime, get a bigger fan. He winked to soften the fact that bigger fans often just make bigger noise. They bought another fan anyway. They bought clips to hold the window higher. They bought ice in the deli and wrapped it in a towel like a patient. Still, Knight insisted. Isolde began keeping a notebook. It was a habit from a summer job shelving returns. Titles, times, temperatures. Notes that sounded like weather reports written by a poet with a bad sense of humor. The dorm ate the cool at 1:18. The bed felt like a cast iron pan that had forgotten it was retired. I dreamed of a field on fire with no flame. She started staying up with the heat to see if it would reveal its reason. She did readings in the hall where the air felt borderline normal. She ate popsicles and pretended it was study fuel. She took walks at 2 and saw the campus under its other mask. A place of slow bikes and glowing vending machines, and a custodian humming while polishing a floor into a lake. Once she saw Gentry in the stairwell, descending from 5 with a coil of flexible duct over his shoulder like a silver python that had agreed to be helpful. He nodded and lifted one hand without letting the duct slip. Sleep, he said in the tone of a wish. By the 3rd week, a rumor floated into their floor group chat. Sutter Hall used to be a summer dorm for high school programs and band camps. The heat was leftover rehearsal energy. Someone else wrote that an electrical fire in 1979 had bruised the 4th floor and the building was still shy about it. A person named Quillen in 409 posted a link to an archive student newspaper with a grainy photo of firefighters carrying a hose through a stairwell that looked exactly like theirs. Headline: Minor fire, major evacuation, no injuries, cause unknown. Mairead, who believed in research the way some people believe in saint candles, went to the library's basement where old newsprint lives. She returned with photocopies that smelled faintly of toner and dust. The story was sparse. Smoke at 3:03, alarms, students in bathrobes on the lawn, the heat source somewhere inside a wall where a maintenance chase ran, repairs by October, reopening with new paint and the same old radiators. She spread the pages on the desk like cards. There, she said softly, pointing to a little box at the margin. Letter to the editor. Student writes that the heat on 4 was getting worse each night before the fire. RA told them to open windows and hydrate. Facilities said everything within normal range. The days were normal. The nights turned the rooms into ovens. Isolde looked from the paper to the cinder block. Sometimes a run of text looks like a hallway and you want to walk down it with a flashlight. She hit the building's history page on the university site. Donors. Dedications. A black and white photo of a ribbon. Nothing about the night warmth that arrived like someone else's breath. At 1:27, the room grew heavy again. As if their research had rung a bell the building had been waiting to hear. The fan jammed the window open, but the heat came anyway. The little thermometer blinked 88 and then surrendered to the idea that numbers, like sleep, sometimes lose track of themselves. Isolde slept badly and woke with a headache that tasted like pennies. On her desk, the notebook sat open to an entry she did not remember writing. The letters were tidy, her handwriting when she tried to look like someone else. She read the line twice, then 3 times. It said, "Open the panel," and the period at the end looked like a door. She waited until afternoon. Gentry had promised to come back sometime, and sometime often arrives when a person steps away for 5 minutes. At 4 o'clock, with the building's light turned down to that late summer amber, she moved the shoe rack again and unscrewed the panel. The dark behind it was not night, exactly. More like the idea of a hallway after the last person has left and turned the lights off out of habit. She lifted her phone flashlight and aimed it into the chase. Dust motes performed private theater. A vertical shaft, maybe 2 feet across, ran up and down like a secret elevator. Patches where pipes had once been. Scars where brackets had caught things. And there, almost directly under the bottom edge of the opening, a flat ledge of old wood with something resting on it. Isolde reached in with care, as if the dark could be brittle. Her fingers found the object's corner. Cardboard. The top felt soft, the way paper does when it has been damp and then forced to pretend it never was. She drew it out. A small box that had once been white and now had become a kind of museum beige. On the lid, written in a hand that pressed too light, a word like a name, Juniper. She set the box on the rug and did not open it. She waited, and the waiting gave her permission to continue. Inside, a stack of index cards tied with string, a folded note, a key on a blue ribbon, narrow as a promise. The note began with, "Dear whoever found this," and continued with the kind of sentences people write when they have been waiting to tell something to a person who will understand. The year at the top of the page read 1979. The signature at the bottom read, "Juniper Vale, Room 4, 16, Sutter Hall." The handwriting leaned to the right, steady as a person who prefers walking to running. "I do not know if I will be believed," it said. "So I am writing this as plainly as I can. Our room is getting warmer each night. The thermometer in our snake plant reads 87 at 3 in the morning. Nobody believes a snake plant. My roommate thinks I am being dramatic. I asked the RA. He said it is just late summer in Ohio. It is not. The heat comes after midnight. It leaves at dawn. The radiator is cold. The vent does not blow. The closet smells like hot iron. I hear ticking in the wall. We are on 4. If you are reading this, maybe you have it too." Isolde felt her own breath echo back from the paragraph. She looked up at the closet door, then at the open chase, as if the words might have leaked. Juniper's note went on, "I work at the cafeteria breakfast shift. I am awake when others are asleep. The heat is a person to me now. It arrives at a time, it stays, it goes. I tried to leave the window open and the sash slid down. I propped it with a book, the book fell, then the window closed by itself. I am not saying a ghost. I am saying something else has a habit here. In case this is useful to you, I am also leaving these." Inside the library's bound journals, someone wrote about a fire on this floor long ago, and then someone else took the page out. I copied what I could before they did. The key is to a storage cabinet in the basement of this building. There are boxes there the staff say are theirs. The key works for the green cabinet that has a dent like a fist. I did not take anything because I got scared. Maybe you will not be. If no one else believes you, I do. I believe you enough to hide this where the building keeps its secrets. If I am wrong, throw this away. If I am right, find what the staff do not talk about. Do not forget to sleep. That is where your spine remembers its job. Mairead came in from rehearsal and stopped when she saw the open panel, the box, the pages laid like a small altar. She sank to the floor and read with both hands pressed flat against the rug as if to steady the words. "We have to find the cabinet," she said, voice quiet like church. "We have to ask Bram to not ask questions." Bram did ask questions because that is also the RA's job. When he saw the note and the box and the panel, he bent his head. He was not a superstitious person, only a person who had worked 3 summers as a camp counselor and learned that buildings hold mood the way lakes hold wind. "I can get you into the basement," he said. "I will walk away from the door and hum loudly so that if anyone asks me what I was doing, I can say I was humming. You will be fast." The basement under Sutter was everything a basement should be. Cool as forgiveness, damp as a memory kept by concrete. The hall shone a soft yellow that made everything look like a faded photograph. Green cabinets lined one wall. The third from the end had a dent like a fist. The key ribbon was blue. The lock turned. Inside, cardboard boxes labeled with dates and short phrases. Stack of work orders, steam archive, fire log, staff do not remove. The handwriting on the labels was neat and stern. Mairead reached up and slid one down. The bottom sagged ominously. They set it on the floor. Inside, manila folders swollen with damp and years. Isolde opened one and pulled a sheet carefully so it would not split. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 416. Unusual heat after midnight. Radiator cold. Closet warm. Check chase, check riser. She set it aside and pulled another. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 412. Student reports late heat, not present daytime. Housekeeping notes window sash malfunctioning. Recommend maintenance weld stop. Isolde looked up. Weld stop. She imagined a person 40 years earlier thinking a sliding sash a nuisance and telling someone to make it tame. Another folder. Fire log, September. Smell of hot iron. Call at 3-3. Response within 3 minutes. Source uncertain. Damage limited to inside of chase between 412 and 416. Cause undetermined. Recommendation: cap steam riser permanently at basement and roof. Service ticket created. The paper clipped to the recommendation was a receipt for parts and a penciled note reading, "Done." A second note added another sentence in a different hand. Night crew reports residual heat persists. Monitor. Mairead pressed her palm over her own heart. This is the story of every building that tries to forget. The parts get fixed, the habit stays. They took photos with their phones like archivists on a deadline. They replaced the folders in the box with the care of people dressing a child who was finally asleep. They locked the cabinet. Bram hummed. The hallway air kept its cool. Back upstairs, they sat with the panel open and the note on the rug, and the cooling afternoon creeping through the window like a kind visitor. Isolde's notebook waited with its white page. She wrote, "Juniper, thank you." She did not know where to put the sentence, so she put it on the first line under the date so it would be the thing the day had to carry. At 1:28, the heat returned. It did not surge. It arrived politely, like a person who has been taught to knock. Isolde sat on the floor beside the open chase and placed her hand just inside without touching any side. The air felt warmer than the room, as if the chase were a throat exhaling a breath it had saved. "What do you want?" she said aloud, not because she thought the building would answer, but because sometimes the voice knows which door truth stands behind. The tick came again, regular, small. Isolde counted between ticks. 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. The rhythm made a shape in her mind, not a clock, a valve. A thing that opens and then holds. A thing that believes in intervals. She looked at the radiator. At the elbow joint where the old pipe met the shutoff wheel, a tiny telltale stain had crept along the seam, brown and precise. She leaned closer. Warm, not hot. Warm like a wrist. Gentry returned the next day with a partner whose name patch read Tova. They listened, as technicians do when the room is allowed to make its case. Isolde showed them the cabinet photos. Tova's lips kept a straight line while her eyebrows confessed their feelings. They pulled the panel and shone better light. They found the old riser, capped, cool. They found a newer run of conduit laid up the side at some later date, carrying wires, not heat. They found insulation collapsed onto itself like old cake. They found nothing that pointed to a flame or a hiss. Tova ran a thermal camera along the cinder block. The screen glowed in false color. A vertical stripe warmer than its neighbors lay behind the closet and the head of the bed. Not red, not danger, yellow shading into orange. Residual, Gentry said, could be heat migrating from a lower source, could be a hot water loop bringing showers to the floor below with more enthusiasm than planned. But the loop below doesn't run at 3 in the morning, Tova said. She had the nap schedule of the building memorized. She pointed to the thermal stripe. This is a habit. They scheduled a shutdown for the following night, midnight to 4. The building would sigh and then sleep while they opened valves and listened for the kind of silence that tells the truth. Bram knocked on doors and posted signs. The girls in Ecology Means Everything, Sweats, groaned about showers and then agreed. The 4th floor exhaled in a collective okay. At 12:12, the pump slowed. The fan in 412 made its small, brave wind. The window held at 3 inches with 2 clips like a pair of loyal hands. At 1:27, the room still warmed. Not as high, not as fast, but enough to say, I am here. Isolde sat on the rug and pressed her shoulder to the closet wall. She closed her eyes so hearing could be her only job. She heard the tick, she heard Myreed's breath even. She heard, outside, a late skateboard roll between classes like a drum. And she heard, very faint and not from the chase at all, a tone. Not a pipe, not a fan, not foreseeable. A note, caught and held. Then gone. She opened her eyes. Myreed was looking at her with a musician's gaze. You heard it too. What is it? Isolde asked. A harmonic. The kind you get when a sympathetic thing vibrates because its friend is nearby. She touched the cello case. Instruments do it, rooms do it, bodies do it when they are convinced. She stood, walked to the bookshelf, lifted a glass of water, and set it on the radiator. The surface quivered. A ripple. A second one. The pattern of the tick. Myreed tuned by memory and sang a single, low pitch, almost under her breath. A hum that could have been mistaken for a thought. The glass shivered. The tick in the wall danced out of step, then found her beat, then stilled as if listening, then returned. What if, she said quietly, all this is sound pretending to be heat? Isolde did not laugh. She had learned the month prior that grief can pretend to be a quiz grade and hunger can pretend to be impatience. Why not sound pretending to be heat? She ran her palm along the cinder block, then placed it flat and left it. A warmth answered. The next day was October 1st. Campus wore flannel and pretended it had always loved cinnamon. Facilities sent an email with the subject line Steam Update that promised further investigation and patience. The 4th floor shared a thread of remedies and rituals. Bowls of ice, mist bottles, wet socks trick, floor naps. No one suggested sage. Someone suggested prayer with a grin that did not deny its usefulness. That night, the heat arrived like a smaller animal. 81, 82, a steady hold at 83. Manageable if you learned how. Isolde placed the glass on the radiator again, turned off the fans, and waited for quiet to settle where it belongs. Myreed sang once, twice, and stopped. The glass's ripples slowed. The tick shifted to the far side of the closet. A draft found her ankles like a cat checking for attention. The room listened back. They made it through October with methods that would have looked ridiculous out of context and were ordinary inside it. They slept with wet towels folded like scarves. They studied in the hall and accepted that their room had been reclassified as a place you prepared to enter rather than a place you lived. They kept the panel off. They learned to say thank you to cool mornings and to say aloud the promise to return before night put its hand on the doorknob. One evening, after a storm blew leaves against the window like letters trying to enter, Bram knocked and leaned in. Facilities found something, he said. You want to come see? The invitation sounded like a friend offering to show you where a magic trick hides its thread. In the basement, Tova stood beside the building's old heart, piping like veins, valves like knuckles, tags tied with string, naming parts from an era that believed names mattered. She pointed to a run that disappeared into the wall beneath, where 412 would stand above them. Here, a capped branch, not steam, an old electrical conduit bypassed years ago. It sits next to a hot water loop. When the loop runs heavy during evening showers, it warms the conduit and then the chase. The chase carries that warmth upward. At night, when the loop cycles to keep the building from feeling abandoned, the warmth lingers. The panel in your closet became the mouth of it. A small chimney with no smoke. Gentry tapped the conduit with his knuckle. You could call it physics, you could also call it habit. Either is the right answer. They installed insulation around the conduit. They added an air brake in the chase so warmth would stop treating the wall like a ladder. They replaced the window's stiff cords so the sash would consent to stay where a human asked it to stay. They promised it would help. They did not promise everything. It helped. The nights cooled to numbers that looked like decimals instead of pronouncements. 77. 76 when the wind took an interest. Isolde slept without wet towels. She still woke at 1:27 once, for no reason except the body's loyalty to former alarms. She lay there and listened. The room made its old house noises. Outside, snow rehearsed far away and then gave up. She fell asleep mouthing the word juniper the way a person mouths the name of a bus stop, to remember where to get off next time. November brought a letter. Real paper, wiggle of ink, the return address, for a dorm across campus, Reed Hall. Inside, 2 sentences in a tidy hand. I found your note in the basement box when Bram fetched more tape for door decorations. My aunt's name was Juniper Vale. She lived in Sutter in 1979. I have a photo of her in front of a radiator holding a cup of tea and laughing like the tea was a joke. Thank you for believing her. Signed, Quillen Vale, room 305. Isolde wrote back. She wrote about the cabinet and the boxes and the way the building had tried to forget. Quillen wrote again with a copy of the photo. Juniper looked like someone who would hide a note and trust the future. Hair gathered in a bandana, eyes practicing mischief. The radiator behind her, upright as a soldier that had decided to sit. Finals arrived like weather that had been announced for weeks and still surprised everyone. Mairead spent long hours in the practice rooms, bow rising and falling like a small boat riding out a swell. Isolde finished a printmaking project of 14 little maps of Sutter Hall. She gave the stairwells names. She drew the 4th floor twice, once by day, once by night. She printed in blue and rust. She added a tiny red dot where their closet panel sat like a secret door. She titled the piece, Heat Rises, Then Cool Heads. On the last night before winter break, they propped the door open and played a playlist of songs that sounded like leaving without saying goodbye. Their neighbors drifted in. Cups of cocoa. A plate of cookies that looked store-bought and tasted like grief in the shape of sugar. Someone told a story about a chessboard left in a laundry room that always had one piece moved between midnight and dawn. Someone else told a story about a campus fountain that ran warm all winter like a stubborn rumor. They laughed easily because relief had come. Before midnight, Bram stood in the doorway with his clipboard and a tired smile and said, "Thank you for not setting anything on fire this semester," which is a low bar that feels high after October. Isolde slept early and woke with the feeling of being watched in a kind way. She rolled over and looked at the open panel. The chase breathed a soft, neutral air. She whispered the habit of her thanks the way some people say grace. For the cool, for the note, for the way buildings hold hands with the people who listen. In January, when the term began again and the air cut like paper, the room behaved. The radiator learned its job when asked. The night stopped bringing heat like a dare. The panel stayed off anyway. They left it open not because they liked the view of a dark shaft, but because some doors, once discovered, should not be forced to forget they can open. One night in late February, when snow made a tidy line along the windowsill and the hall smelled like wool and wet boots, Mairead tuned and held a low note the way a person can hold a breath when they want the person across from them to finish their thought. The glass on the radiator did not ripple, the tick did not come. She let the note go, she smiled. Habit broken, she said, and then added, or perhaps trained. Spring came in fits of joy and apology. Sutter Hall turned quiet, then loud, then quiet again. Finals chalked the sidewalks with equations and wishes. On the last afternoon before move-out, Gentry and Tova came by with a work order that did not need signatures. "We are capping the chase permanently," Tova said. "Not the kind of permanent that forgets. The kind that leaves a note for the next person." Gentry nodded at the open panel. "Leave it if you want. We're not offended." He tapped the cinder block once with his knuckle and said, "Thanks for telling us. We need buildings to snitch on us. Otherwise, we fix the wrong things." They closed their boxes. They took the plants off the sill. They rolled the rug into a new shape. Bram signed their checkout forms with a flourish. In the hall, Isolde taped one last paper to the wall at eye level between 412 and 416. Not a manifesto, not a myth, a map. She had printed 2 copies. The little red dot, the words, "If your room gets warmer every night, you are not dramatic and you are not alone." The panel in the closet is held by 4 screws. Please listen for the tick. Please go to the basement cabinet with the green dent. And please, sleep. Your spine remembers its job when you do. She signed it tiny, just initials, because the story did not belong to her alone. Years later, when she would sleep in cities with windows that sealed shut and air that arrived by command, she would sometimes wake at 1:27 and rest her palm against the wall. Habit. Memory. A check-in with the building around her. She would feel the honest cool of drywall. She would hear the thrum of someone's TV 3 floors down, or a neighbor's late laugh, and think, heat pretended to be sound, then sound pretended to be heat, and we learned to name what was ours to name. If you are listening to this, and your room keeps getting warmer every night, put your hand on the wall. Count between the ticks if you hear them. Call the person with the name Patch and the quiet eyes. Ask them to look for the habit behind the system. And if you find a note in a chase, write your own, then leave the panel open long enough for the room to remember it can breathe. The night will arrive either way. It is better when it finds you ready, with a glass of water on the radiator and a song in your pocket that knows how to lay its hand gently on the room and say, "We hear you, we're staying. We're going to keep you company until morning cools the world back into something we can bear." A hiker found a phone recording. The last minute, he found the phone just before dusk on a switchback above Blue Lake in the San Juan Mountains of southwest Colorado. It lay half buried in scree, face up, a spiderweb crack stitched across the glass, the red record dot stubbornly pulsing as if the device itself refused to look away from whatever it had heard. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The hiker's name was Ansel Rook, 33, a lineman from Pueblo who spent his days climbing utility poles and his weekends climbing whatever rose higher than his weekdays dared. It was late September 2021. The sky had that high-altitude rinse of cobalt that makes evergreen needles look sharper than they are. Below him, the water in the lake caught the last light and held it like a breath. Above him, a line of weather gathered beyond the ridgeline, thin-boned at first, then thickening into something like intention. Ansel lifted the phone with 2 fingers, the way you lift a bird that might be stunned but alive. The recording timestamp read 4:57 p.m. The battery icon showed 2%, then 1. He hesitated. The screen was smeared with a comma of dirt, the kind that comes from a palm skidding along gravel. He did not press play right away. He looked around first, because that is what you do when you find a thing that wants to tell you a story. You make room for it by seeing the place where the story happened. The switchback clung to an outthrust of talus and alpine grass, long blades moving in a wind that never quite became a gust. A cairn stood a little off the trail, too tidy to be natural, too thoughtful to be a prank. 2 boot prints were pressed into a patch of damp earth near the cairn, heel then toe, the kind of prints that happen when someone stops and leans forward for a better look at something that never asked to be looked at. Beyond that, the slope fell away into a tumble of shale and broken quartzite, a gray throat that could swallow a person without even needing to clear its own voice. He pressed play. First came footsteps, soft, measured, the sound of trail shoes finding their way over loose stone. Then, wind, not a roar, but a long vowel. A woman's breath, a zipper. The little chirp of a trekking pole knocking against a rock, and then being caught, steadied, forgiven. A far-off raven called once. Then, once again, the recording clipped and crackled and then let the sound in wider as if the phone had been lifted from a pocket. The woman's voice arrived next, not speaking to the phone, not to herself exactly, but to the place. Almost there, she said, and even in 2 words there was a smile you could hear. Another voice came in, thinner with distance, male, from above or beyond a switchback. Ansel could not see from his spot. Don't cut the corner. The tone was teasing, not scolding. It carried the kind of affection that worries by pretending not to. I know, the woman answered, and you could hear the grin get wider, as if she liked being told a rule she had already decided to follow. Ansel glanced up the trail. No silhouettes against the ridge, no packs leaning against a crumbled spruce, no motion that would explain a pair becoming zero. On the recording, the footsteps paused, the little metallic skr of a carabiner, a soft hum, tuneless and content, then a small sound that was not content at all. A pebble moving in a way pebbles do not choose for themselves, a slide that was also a decision. Hey, the man's voice said, quick now, and closer, and then there was skin and throat panic wrapped in one word. Wait. The breath on the audio sped up. A severe silence followed, a silence full of edges, the way silence gets when it is about to be broken by something you cannot rewind. Then a single sound Ansel would think about later and later and later, a thump like a hand slapping the top of a piano closed. A gasp that turned into a half laugh, because sometimes the body does not admit the truth on the first try. A scrabbling, nails on stone, the phone fell or was dropped. The microphone scraped against the ground and filled the world with sand. Voices blurred, a name rose up out of the grit. Junia. The word was carried like a prayer someone forgot how to finish. More sliding, a shout that stopped without a period, a sound like a pack hitting and then being dragged. Then only wind. Wind and the long, small sparrow of a cry that arrived uninvited from very far down, which might have been a person and might have been granite learning how to speak. The recording ended because the battery couldn't pretend any longer. Ansel stood very still, the phone warm now in his hand, the way a telling is warm the second time through. He tried the word on his own tongue. Junia. He looked where the 2 boot prints ended and where the ground began to pretend it was a floor but wasn't. He approached the cairn and hated it for existing and thanked it for marking the spot all at once. He kneeled and saw the narrow scraped shine a person leaves when their boot finds a path no one built for it. The first drops hit his neck. Big, impatient, high country drops that are not water at all, but announcements. He lit his headlamp early, not because he needed it, but because a cone of light sometimes manages the world better than a wide, honest dark. He pulled an orange bandana from his pocket and tied it to the cairn. He took 3 photos in a slow circle: ground, slope, lake, and the way the sky had folded its arms. Then he did the most useful thing he knew. He climbed down to cell range. The call to the San Juan County Sheriff rang once, twice, and then a voice that had said this greeting more times than it wanted to answered with a name Ansel would remember. Deputy Cale Morrow. Calm. Not bored. Ready. Ansel described it carefully. Coordinates from his handheld GPS, the audio, the voices, the shape the trail made where it almost shook hands with the slope and then thought better of it, the bandana, the weather, rumored by the sky. Stay off the fall line, Morrow said. Get back to Timberline if you can and wait for search and rescue to reach you. Do not go after anyone you cannot see. He breathed in a way that made the phone sound like a lung. We've had a call about a late return from the Blue Lake Spur today. Your timing is not unlucky. It is the clock we were already watching. Ansel did as he was told. He descended to the last stand of wind-shaved spruce and waited, the kind of waiting that hums through bone. He could hear the storm organize itself on the ridge. He could feel how the mountains wear weather like a mood, quickly, convincingly, and then change it without apologizing. Headlamps appeared in the first gray of evening, a cluster of steady stars moving with purpose. 4 figures and a 5th slighter one moving with the confidence of a person who knows where the rocks are even when the rocks won't tell you. The 5th lifted a hand. Her hood was down despite the wind. Her hair was braided tight to keep the night from borrowing it. I'm Dory Keene, she said. San Juan Search and Rescue. This is Micah, Jovan, Arthur, and Ren. You the caller. Ansel nodded and gave them the phone. Dory turned the volume up and held the device near her ear, head bent, eyes closing in that way people have when they magnify one sense by dimming the rest. The others listened too, the small team suddenly one organism. When the man said wait, their spines stilled. When the name rose, Dory's mouth pressed flat, not cold, not warm. Deciding, she handed the phone back and pointed. Show me. They climbed in a line, the kind of line that knows which stones you can trust and which pretend to be trustworthy. The cairn found them. The bandana shivered in its small way. Dory crouched, laid 2 fingers on the scraped shine, and read it the way some people read Braille, asking for permission first. She looked down the slope, her eyes adjusted to a grammar Ansel did not speak. We anchor here, she said. 2 down to the first ledge, 2 on belay, Ren with me at the lip. You, Ansel Rook, you stay with Ren. If I tell you to move left, you move left. He swallowed, which tasted like metal, and nodded. The first thunder spoke. Not near, not far. The polite cousin of a threat. Rope hissed through gloves. Metal clinked with the bright sound mountain metal makes, a sound that knows at least 3 languages and prefers the most precise. Dory called down softly and answered herself when the wind was too busy to carry voices back up. 30 minutes grows very large when you cannot spend it on your own terms. The storm ignored them and then considered them and then walked away to another valley. The sky tried on a paler blue for a minute to see if it fit. Ansel watched a chipmunk watch them with the same fascination he felt. The animal had the kind of confidence that comes from being very good at running from everything. A shout made of 2 syllables rose from below, triumphant and careful at once. Got one? Dory closed her eyes for just long enough to speak without words to whatever listens up there. Then she called back. Name. Micah's voice floated up, thinner than it should have been. Junia. Alive. The sound inside Ansel's chest became something he had not realized he was holding back. He breathed it out in one steady line and leaned both palms into the earth, because you should always touch what keeps you from falling. They worked then. A litter arrived in pieces on shoulders and came together like an idea that had been there all along. Hands did what hands should do when someone needs to be lifted from one kind of gravity into another. They spoke to the person on the ledge in short lines, the way you speak to a horse you love and do not want to spook. Junia, we have you. Junia, do you feel this? Junia, breathe in when I count to 3. We're moving on, nowhere but up. Rain made a sentence across the slope and then erased it again. The wind forgot itself and then remembered. A raven rode the air as if it had invented it. Ansel saw her when they came over the lip. She had the look of someone who had been negotiating with Stone and won, but did not yet dare to celebrate. Mid-30s maybe, hair the color of straw left in the sun, eyes that wanted to close and would not. Blood dried in a tidy line along her left temple. The right knee of her hiking pants was torn, and beneath it, angry purple began to write its name. A bracelet made of 2 woven cords circled her wrist, one blue, one green. The blue was frayed as if teeth had once worried it during a long night. She looked at Ansel first, not because of anything he had done, but because his face was the closest one when the world came back into focus. Her voice was rough from cold and prayer. Did you hear it? Did you hear me call him? He did not know who him was, and it did not matter. Yes, he said, as if yes were a kind of bandage. We heard you. We came. They moved her in the neat, practiced way people move someone who is more precious than anything else in the room. The rope line looked like music from a distance. The lightning threatened to tune its instruments and then decided not to play. The litter found the shadow of the pines and then the steeper shadow of the trail through meadow. 2 miles became an hour. The trail had arrived with the small surprise a finish line always carries. A white truck from the county waited, engine narrating its own faithfulness. A paramedic named Orrin Hux set hands on Junia with the kind of competence that makes even pain look smaller around the edges. He asked her name to ask her other things. Junia Ridge, she said. 35. From Albuquerque. Came up yesterday. Intended to camp. Yes, I was with someone. He was up the switchback. It was our second turn around the lake. That's his phone. She watched Ansel put the device into Oren's outstretched palm and then closed her eyes because the world was too heavy to carry all the way open. Oren asked the question that had to be asked. Where is he? Junia shook her head once, a small, broken metronome. I don't know. I slipped. He yelled. I caught the ledge. I don't know. Dory stood with her back to the truck and looked up at the ridge. Even from the trailhead, she could read the day along the stone. She spoke into the radio with the language that belongs to people who need updates to be short and full, second subject unaccounted, male voice on recovered audio, last known above Blue Lake Switchback 2, weather marginal, lightning east. Request second team from Telluride side if available, plus one dog on dawn, copy. It was full dark when the second team arrived. Headlamps stitched the slope like fireflies, convinced they were surgeons. The dog named Pallas, coat black as a charcoal drawing that had learned to move, took the scent from a hat Junia had kept tucked under her hip belt. The dog read the ground like an old friend's letter. Up to the cairn, left where the trail pretends it is a suggestion. Down 3 shelves of stone, some people would call cliffs, and other people would call arguments. Then the animal stopped, sat, whined once, and put its chin on its paws. They found nothing that night. Not nothing in that cruel sense, but nothing you could put your hands on and say this belongs to him. No pack, no trekking pole, no hat. No snack wrapper with a name in tidy black letters like a first day of school. The mountain held its tongue. Morning came with a sky made of tin and apology. They went again, Pallas worked again, Wren set anchors again. Micah called in a voice that refused to become thin. Ansel was sent home because there is a point where more bodies become less help. He drove south toward Durango, the road curling along the Animas River, cottonwoods just beginning to try on their gold. He listened to the recording once more in the motel parking lot, sitting very still, as if any motion would knock truth out of the speakers. Junie awoke in a bed that had rails and numbers and beeps. 2 things lived in her body now, pain and the certainty that she had not imagined the second voice. The nurse wrote her name on a whiteboard that greeted morning patients like a cheerful aunt. Junia. The day. The plan. The surgeon's name with its syllables arranged like fence posts. Deputy Cale Morrow came in late morning. He had the kind of careful that does not pretend it isn't careful. He set a small gray recorder on the tray table with the gelatin cup and did not move it closer to her as if it were a burden. He asked permission. She nodded. He asked again because some nods do not mean yes. She said yes. He pressed the button and spoke the words aloud the way people do when they want to make the world behave. Interview with Junia Ridge. Date, time, present, she told him. The way the weather had looked all day like a bluff, and how bluffs tire themselves out eventually. The man she had met at the trailhead that morning when she realized she'd left her stove fuel on the driver's seat back in town, and he had said without flinching, I have more than I need, take mine. His name was Oren Bale. Not a common name, which helped the telling and hurt the hurt. He was 39, maybe 40. He had the kind of smile that makes coffee taste the way it ought to. He had the kind of pace that lets conversation sit down and stay a while. He had his sister's dog and a photo on his phone, and had not tried to pretend it was his own. He had said it was his first time above 12,000 feet since he was a boy, and that the air was thinner, but his head felt clearer, and wasn't that funny. She had not planned to hike with him. They had both headed out early to beat the thunderheads that never quite decided to arrive. They crossed the first creek together because rocks are often friendships in disguise. They turned at the little waterfall, then again where the climb gets greedy. Somewhere near noon, they split. He to the saddle above the lake to look for ptarmigan, she to the outcrop on the western side where the blue looks bottomless and makes you feel the size of your own heartbeat. They regrouped by accident among a stand of willows that kept the wind in its coat. They ate together because food tastes better when someone else laughs at your almonds for being aspirational and you laugh at their gummy bears for being perfect. He offered the second loop around the lake, and she said yes, because saying yes is sometimes a way of agreeing with the day. And then the fall. And then the seconds that were longer than seconds. The name she tried to lace to him as if names were rope. The way the ledge held and then complained and then held again. The fact that there had been no shout that sounded like pain, only a shout that sounded like surprise, and then a long conversation between gravity and silence that ended with silence believing it had won. Kale listened the way people listen when they use listening as a tool. He did not say, "I am sorry," in the first 5 minutes, because sometimes sorry has to wait its turn behind words that can anchor an actual investigation. He asked for a description that could be drawn into a cruiser laptop sketch. He asked for the brand of the pack, the color of the jacket, the kind of hat. He asked if Oren had a habit of humming, joking, leaning to his left when he walked. Junia closed her eyes and watched the man step through the room her mind made of the trail. He hummed, she said finally, low, tuneless, when he tried to put a word to a story he had not told yet. He leaned into weather, as if weather liked people who leaned back. They searched 3 days. Helicopter on day 2, when the wind played nice, no body, no sign. The slope did what slopes do. It took the small and offered back the smaller, a strap end. A pocket knife that might have belonged to anyone. A grin of metal that once was a grommet. Nothing that knew how to clap its hands and say, mine. The internet made its murmurs the way it does. The forums filled with conjecture. The ones who have never been above treeline explain to the ones who have exactly how Talus works. A post from a cousin arrived in the kind of font grief chooses when it has to choose one. Have you seen him? Another from a person who knew a person who might have known him and wrote that he was the kind of man who never took the last donut. A stranger said, why was she with him at all, as if who walks beside you guarantees you a ladder back down. Dory Keene did not read the forums. She read the mountain. On day 4, she told Kale in a voice that allowed both compassion and math that if the slope had decided to keep him, it likely would continue to keep him until snow learned what it wanted to do and then taught them in spring. Kale nodded, his jaw set lazy and hard, the way the river sets a stone down and then decides where it lives. Junia went home to Albuquerque with stitches like commas along her hairline and a knee wrapped in instructions. She slept 4 nights without the part of sleep that heals. On the 5th night, she dreamed of blue water that did not know it was cold, and a voice saying, wait, in a tone of gentle impatience, as if wait were a surprise party she would like if she would just stop walking long enough to see the lights. Come on. Ansel went back to work. Poles. Wire. The logic of circuits. He found himself stopping on the shoulders of county roads to watch clouds interrogate a ridge and answer themselves with rain. He listened to the recording once more, then deleted it because a voice should be treated like a person's glove. Pick it up only if it is yours or if the person who wore it has asked you to hand it back. The snow came in late October, the way it comes in the San Juans, when it decides to be industrious. It buried the slope's grammar, it set down the season like a book a child might not be ready for. Thanksgiving arrived with a turkey that somebody had to carve whether they wanted to or not. December wrote its short letters, and January forgot to put a return address on anything. In early June of the next year, when the snowpack loosened its jaw, 2 things happened on the same day. At 11:19 in the morning, a pair of hikers from Montrose came down from the saddle above Blue Lake early because the sun had made everything overconfident and the heat on the rock had learned to be a lie. They paused near the outthrust of Talus, where a cairn had once worn an orange bandana and now wore nothing but its own small pride. A zipper glinted among the stones. The zipper was attached to a jacket the color of fog. The jacket was wrapped around the idea of a man. They did what the poster in the ranger station says to do when a finding stops being a finding and becomes a person. Mark the spot. Note the time. Back away in the exact steps you made arriving. Carry more silence than you usually carry. Call. The second thing that happened at 1:27 in the afternoon occurred in a backyard in Albuquerque where the cottonwood shed its soft snow over a patch of lawn that wanted more water than the city wanted to give it. Junia's phone chimed. She looked down, thinking it would be the alert she still had not turned off for the county updates. Instead, there was a text from a number she had written down on a napkin and saved on purpose. It said only this: we found him. Dory, Junia sat on the back steps and watched three ants perform a task more complicated than any she had been assigned that week. She did not cry because they had prepared her politely not to expect this. She did not smile because smiling was a verb her face had not practiced with that sentence. She pressed call and heard a voice that wore dust and care. Dory told her what could be told on a phone and promised the rest would be told face to face, because some tellings don't belong to towers and waves. A week later, Junia drove north, past Española, where the signs know two languages, past Abiquiu, where the river looks like it can't help but gather light, over the state line, that is a thought and a mile marker and a map all at once, into the San Juans, where the air remembers your first name and uses it. Dory met her at the small office with the big map and two chairs that had learned to carry tired people. Kale was there too. He set a folder on the table and did not open it until her hands rested on her knees, the way you rest a cup on a saucer. "We recovered MrBallen," he said, and the word recovered did not feel like anything except exactly itself. Two hikers saw the jacket. He left the trail at the switchback, slipped on the lip, and fell more than 30 feet to a shelf. The shelf kept him for winter. He likely died on impact. No signs of anything except the mountain doing what mountains do when you ask them to hold a human being. The autopsy says the thing autopsies say when physics chooses the verbs. She asked the question that had been living in her since the voice said, "Wait, did he speak after I slipped?" We can't say, Kale said. And then because the truth deserved a little mercy, he added, "The shelf where we found him was below your ledge, not above it." Which means his voice on the recording was in the seconds before you both stopped standing and started falling. After that, he would have been below you. If you don't remember hearing him then, that is your brain giving you a gift it knew you could not buy for yourself yet. Dory laid something on the table wrapped in a brown paper lunch bag. "We think this is yours," she said. "We found it lodged in a crack just above where you came to rest. It had become part of the mountain, but it was stubborn in a way that listened." Junia unwrapped the thing, the bracelet from her wrist. The blue and green cords had become one color winter makes. The frayed end had been burnt to keep the braid from unraveling and then worn down again by time. She turned it in her hand, thumb finding the place where the weave had learned her skin and made it a home. "He gave me this at the trailhead," she said. "He said he made two of them when he decided to stop drinking 3 years ago. He kept the green, he wore it under his watch. He gave me the blue because I said I had stopped apologizing for being careful the year before, and he laughed and said, 'That sounds like a thing worth marking.' We only knew each other a handful of hours. And yet," she closed her fingers, then opened them again. "Ansel Rook sent me the audio file. Did you know that?" He asked if it would help. I said yes before I knew the answer. It did not help, and it did. Both are true. They stood later at the trailhead. The mountains looked less like authorities and more like the long, patient elders they are. A breeze moved through the spruce in a way that would be mistaken for whispering if you were the kind of person who liked to be mistaken that way. Junia closed her eyes and saw the shelf she had not seen. She said his name once out loud and not loud, the syllables answered by not answering at all. They buried Orrin Bale in a small cemetery behind a church that had learned to be ecumenical because the weather didn't care which god you favored. His sister came with the dog whose photo he had shown. She spoke without paper, which meant her mouth borrowed words from the heart, and the heart forgave the mouth for not being tidier. Junia stood 2 rows back and pressed her fingers into the bracelet and found she did not have to press very hard to feel the world answer. Ansel did not come to the service because attendance is sometimes not the right way to honor a stranger you helped. He drove a route that took him past a ridgeline and paused in the pullout that locals use because it's theirs. He left his truck idling. He rolled the window down. A meadowlark said something with conviction and melody. He answered, "I hear you," and meant it. As summer leaned hard into itself, tourists thinned the trails with their curiosity and filled the cafes with their hunger. The blue of Blue Lake looked less like an opinion and more like proof. Dory kept her team on the same frequency, even on days when no one needed rescuing, because habit saves more lives than heroics. Kale kept notches in his days for the kind of paperwork no show has ever made look interesting. It was work. It mattered that it was work. Years later, in a living room in Santa Fe, Junia would set a phone on a table between two mugs and play the last minute for a friend who asked very gently to hear it. The friend would listen with eyes open because some listenings deserve witness. In that small recording lived a hill, a sky, a woman, a man, a word made of 4 letters in air, and a sort of silence you learn to share with people you trust. When it ended, they would sit still long enough that the room would remember they were there and offer them back their voices. "What do you make of it?" the friend would ask, not to argue, just to let the world have one more chance to tell her what it thinks it is. That he said, "Wait," Junia would answer, and meant it kindly. That I said almost there and meant it with all my heart. That the mountain was not a villain and not a friend. That the cliff listened and then did what cliffs do. That the phone fell the way a witness sometimes falls and still did its job. That people who did not know me put a rope on and let me become part of their workday. That the second voice is a place in my head now where something can live without having to die again. She would hold up her wrist. The bracelet would have been replaced by another that looked very much like it and not at all like it, blue and green, new knots, same story. She would say, "I tell the mountains out loud now when I turn around." I say, "See, this is me deciding to see you again." And sometimes the wind says nothing back, and sometimes it says a sound that is not a word and still feels like one. Here is what does not always fit in the write-up. The last minute of a recording can keep playing long after the file ends. The man's wait can become a way to step out of traffic, to carry a ladder with a friend, to hold a door without trying to become the door. The woman's almost there can become a way to measure a good day, not by miles, but by a turn you made toward kindness when no one was checking your odometer. If you go to the San Juans, and I hope you do, look up. Say the names of the peaks, like they are elders you respect. Tell the sky you will be back before it begins to think about electricity. Pack a bandana, a bright color that could be seen from far away by a stranger who might need a small flag to make a big decision. If you find a cairn, leave it be unless a ranger told you otherwise. If you find a phone, do what Ansel did. Press play only after you have looked around. Then, if you must, listen. Hear the footsteps, the wind, the breath. The word that might be a prayer and might be a joke and might be both. Decide carefully what you will do with the minute you have been given. It will be late somewhere by the time you finish this. It will be early somewhere else. The country is wide and the mountains are quiet, and the phones we carry don't always know when to stop telling the truth. If tonight you hear the wind make a sound that asks you to wait, take one step back from the edge and put your hand on your own shoulder the way a good friend would. If tomorrow your trail offers you a second loop, say yes or no out loud so the day can hear you and keep its promise not to argue. And if the last minute ever finds you the way it found Ansel, at the exact space where listening became a kind of work, let your voice be the one that says, "We hear you, we're coming," then come.